Hi, my name is Jessica White, and I'm just going to show you a couple of areas that we have discovered with the Mastery Report in Apples, which is the adaptive learning tool for learning science and STEM. So I'm just going to share my screen. So you can see here that we have a topic called animals, including humans. And there are 30 students with that have tried this topic, and you can see at the side the percentages of 37% of struggling, 5% are inconclusive, 43% have not quite started, and 15% have mastered. So if we go in and have a look at the struggling part, so as you can see here, 47% of the students have not have yet to meet the expectation of this mastery, and there is 10% that have mastered with difficulties, and then this part is that they've not started, and then there's 3% that's inconclusive. And if we just go in, and we can see the students that are having difficulties. Obviously, we've anonymized these students so that we can't see them as AMDON, but the teacher can then identify which students are struggling and which students have mastered with difficulties and which students have not yet started. So, you know, obviously the teacher can plan around those that are struggling and give a little push to those that haven't yet started, and also to understand that those that have mastered but also have had difficulties, you know, perhaps to ask them what those difficulties are, but we can actually go in and find out. So let's take a look at that now. So first of all, here we have, these are the top 5 challenging topics from animals, including humans. And the question for this particular one here is identify an unlabeled diagram to model how blood flows in the human circulatory system and the respective organs and their functions. And we can take a look at the question. And here is the study, so a diagram that they need to study. And which of the following blood vessels, A, B, C, and D, carries blood rich in carbon dioxide? Is it A and B, or is it A and C? So yeah, the answer is A and C. This is, you know, something that is quite controlled, whereas before we looked at STEM works, which is a bit more exploratory. So students will have looked at those exploratory STEM works, and being now looked at how we can, you know, sort of evaluate and test the students to see what their knowledge is of this. And it's presented to them obviously in a different way than an actual human body. So it's that transferal of knowledge that's really also being assessed and evaluated here. So if we have a look, so yeah, student 1, for example, could partner with, say, student 8. Or student 8 could in fact come together with 5 of these students and teach them what they know so that they can help. So we've actually got 3 groups here that are struggling. So we could actually divide those groups with these 3 students here and have them work with, so be 5 and then 4 students to those 3 other students. So that would be really peer-to-peer learning. And what they could do is they could go into STEM works and explore the resources that is a little bit more, say, exploratory and obviously more to do with the actual learning. It's, you know, the actual discovering and inquiry itself. So, and, you know, that way then they can peer-to-peer teach. So if we just go back. So yeah, so the second one is identify errors in the direction of blood flow in a labeled model diagram of blood vessels connecting the organs of the respiratory and circulatory and other body systems. Excuse me. Focus on organs as references. So we can have a quick look at the question here. So again, it's a flow diagram. So what we can infer from what we have seen previously to what we see now is where the students are really struggling. It's still 47% on this that are struggling, which is quite a high amount. is that perhaps the transferal of knowledge from what you have seen in what the students have seen as the body parts to an actual flow diagram is not really connecting. So we could actually perhaps, as a teacher, say, okay, let's try and look at how we can transfer that knowledge and really plan that in class and really make a step forward in saying, okay, this is how it works in terms of looking into your body, but this is how it works in terms of a flow diagram, and maybe get the students to draw that flow diagram or to try and explain it to other people or label the diagram. So that means that they can then practice transferring that knowledge from looking at a body to the actual flow diagram itself. Because these two are very similar from, this question layout is very similar to what the students were struggling with in the first question that we saw. So we can definitely infer that it's something about the flow diagram that may have sort of thrown the students, and it's not quite clear to them yet. So looking at the third one, that's 44% of students have yet to master the expectation of the mastery. So let's have a look at the question here. So this question is not a flow diagram, but it's a problem solving question. So which of the following activities will most likely speed up a person's heart rate? So A, taking a nap, B, taking a slow walk, C, doing aerobic exercise, or D, going on an exciting roller coaster ride? Well, B, no. A and B only? No. So C, D, what do we have here? We have B, C, and D. Okay. Slow walk is probably where they got tripped up, like I just did, because I think that it says here, increase physicality and breathing. So which of the following activities will most likely speed up a person's heart rate? And so I think for this one, it's really about looking at the question and specifically, what is it asking? Is it asking about what happens when a person has a really high heart rate? No, it's not. It's asking more about what will most likely increase or speed up that heart rate. So it's really at this point about the learning strategy, and to really think about what are they asking me as a question, and how would that relate to what the answer is. So being very specific, so looking at details. So you might want to, as a teacher, really kind of hone in on practicing with the students the details, listening and reading, so that they really get that. Okay, so going on to 4. So now we have obviously a bit more of a body diagram, which is probably what they're used to. Certainly within STEMworks, then there's a lot more of that rather than the flowcharts. But it's still quite challenging. So study the diagram below. Which of the following shows the correct function of parts X, Y, and Z? So this is really about labeling. So you have, so part X traps the dust particles in the air that we breathe. So up here, and then part Y transports air from part X to Z. And then part Z enables exchange of gases to take place. So what's interesting here is that it's quite detailed, and it's really about like thinking about that labeling and how to differentiate. So that might need to maybe done with an experiential exercise. So maybe people going outside, thinking about how you breathe through your nose, what happens with the chest, and then how that's exchanged, and to talk about that. But then also to have a look at the STEMworks as well, and see, how that can explain it with an interactive way, and practice the labeling as well. Maybe you want to put labels up on the wall as well. You can do them in the classroom like that after you've done a STEMworks exercise. So that's a way that you could practice the labeling, because labeling is quite tough. And so if we go on to the 5th one, yeah, again, it's a flow chart, and So really, perhaps we could infer from this that the students here need more practice on not only flowcharts, but also to how to classify the information, and figure out really about what is the data showing us from the table, and what is the data showing us from the flowchart, and then putting it together. So yeah, so that's a really that's I think something quite challenging for the students to make that analysis. So maybe like practicing analysis of classification is something at this stage that they need a lot of help with. Okay, so that's how we can work with the mastery report, and really, from the details there. And of course, how to mix the students with peer-to-peer learning so that they can be helped. And that, of course, gives like an overall picture of all the different questions there. And if you want to go into the questions in detail, then you can always click on that question there. And so you can see, again, this is about like diagrams and which of the following states the function of the fine hairs and nostrils in the human body, and then they have to click on it. So it's really, as you can see, this is actually very similar to the labeling that we saw previously, but it's just shown in a different way. So again, it's about the transferal of knowledge. So maybe that's what they need to practice. They need to practice that transferal of knowledge in different diagrams, different contexts. So having this kind of data can really help the teacher to understand, where their gaps are, how to plan the lessons, how to understand what kind of resources do you need for the next step in those lessons. Yeah, so that gives a full overview, and you've got the key at the bottom there with struggling, not started, inconclusive, mastered with difficulties, and mastered with ease. And yeah, so that's all good. So if we go back to the mastery report and to go into so then you've got light, which is a different topic, and you can go in here, and it seems that just looking at the overall overview, it seems that they've handled that quite well. There seems to be a lot more of those that have mastered with difficulties. You can just hover the mouse over it, and you can see in the first question there, then 60% have mastered it, but obviously with difficulties, hesitating or taking some time. But it's still a lot more than, say, the what you saw with the human body parts and the living things. So what we can conclude and infer from this is that not that much time is needed to spend on light in terms of remedial practice, as much as, say, is needed with the human body parts and organs and so on. So you've got, 43%, that's still quite high, 54, that's still quite high relative to the other topics. But it seems that they're struggling a lot with something there. So let's take a look what this is. So if we have a look, then we've got as you saw in the other one, the top challenging topics for light and the masteries for this class. And the size of a cast shadow that can vary as an object moves nearer to or farther from the light source. And this can be represented graphically. So 43% of students have yet to meet the expectation of this mastery. Let's have a look at the question. So yeah, this is quite a challenging question. So the children are usually 10 years old. So a man was cycling home at night down a road with a lamp post at position B shown below. So there we go, cycling along. Which graph shows shows the change in the length of the man's shadow. So as he cycled from point A to point C, past the lamppost to point B. So we've got here the length of the shadow and the time it would take. So yeah, this is actually quite difficult because obviously it's a different way of, again, presenting the material than say they would have had with the experiments and showing, you know, the practical experiments of looking at how you move and how the shadow moves and when it gets bigger and when it gets smaller. So I think it's this transferal of knowledge that's really getting the students. You know, so you've got an experiment, and then how do you transfer that experiment into a graph? How do you transfer that experiment into a flow chart? How do you transfer a photograph or, you know, an understanding of your body into a flow chart? These kinds of things seem to be quite challenging for these particular students. So as a teacher, what we can do is then say, okay, we have this experiment, let's now draw a graph when they do the experiment within class, within STEM works. And that will get them to apply the knowledge themselves and see how they can transfer from one thing to another, from one way of showing your results to another way of showing your results. And if we maybe look at something like this, we've got 27. So yeah, the light that meets a mirror, at which opening would a person be able to see a lighted candle? So it would be here, opening Z. So again, I think this is, yeah, it's quite difficult to sort of look at what the experiments are when you do them live, the live experiments, and then have the mirror, you know, in front of you, and you can see that, and then you can say, okay, this is the opening where you can see the light, the lit candle. But then actually seeing it in a kind of flow diagram like that, it's more abstract. So yeah, so it's becoming clear what these students need is how to sort of abstract the information into something that is a bit more, well, but more put on paper for the exams, I would say. So instead of just like pictures or looking at live experiments. So that gives us a really good understanding of what these students need. And again, we can go into the peer-to-peer teaching. It looks like particularly here, there are a lot of students that, the 13 students that have, you know, mastered with difficulties, but that can really support then these students here, those that are maybe not started or maybe, you know, need some extra support with struggling, and we can pair them. And you know, it'd be quite good to put them in pairs for this one because there are quite a few of the students that are able to support. So that's just some of the ways that this report, the mastery report, can help. And you know, of course, again, you can get, as with the previous topic, you can see in detail an overview of how light travels and how that light is really, how you can draw conclusions from that line of sight. And, you know, it seems that there is quite a bit of difficulty with looking at actual graphs. And so that's something that I would definitely focus on as a teacher, and, you know, how to draw a graph from the experiments tried and tested. Great. So I hope that's helped a little bit of not only going into detail about the mastery itself, but also how it can be used in a teaching situation, particularly looking at some results from the pilot that we did, and looking forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you for listening.